Prophet Michael had been excommunicated from his church, his empire reduced to rubble, and his name dragged through the mud. The once glittering edifice of his megachurch stood as a hollow shell, a monument to his deceit and hubris. But even amid his downfall, Michael refused to fade into obscurity. He had tasted power, and the hunger for it was insatiable. His fall was not an end, but merely the prelude to his greatest reinvention. For 3 years, Michael lived in the shadows, biding his time. He moved quietly through the outskirts of Nairobi, far from the spotlight. The city had forgotten him, or so he thought. But Michael was a master of reinvention. He knew that the world was ever-changing, and he was not one to let a single setback extinguish the fire of ambition that burned within him. If the physical world had turned its back on him, the digital realm was an entirely new playing field, a place where a man could reinvent himself with the click of a button. It was a quiet, unassuming start. Michael knew that rebuilding a church from scratch would be no easy feat. His reputation preceded him, and the whispers of his past deception were still fresh in the minds of many. The stories of false healings, manipulated prophecies, and schemes with wealthy women were viral and passed along from one person to the next. His name had become synonymous with fraud. But Michael had always thrived in the face of adversity. His charisma, command of language, and ability to manipulate hearts and minds were gifts he'd honed over the years. He knew that all he needed was the right platform, the right narrative, and the right people. It began with a few close friends, loyal followers who still believed in his vision. They gathered in the small, makeshift church Michael had built on the edge of the city. The building was humble, unremarkable, and hardly fit for a prophet. But Michael had learned that appearances were deceiving. It wasn't about the size of the building. It was about the power of the message, the allure of the promise. At first, things were slow, very slow. The few that showed up to his services were familiar faces, people who had known him from his earlier days. The crowds were small, and the once great prophet felt the weight of his obscurity. This wasn't the life he'd dreamed of. This wasn't the empire he had imagined. But Michael was patient. He knew this was just the beginning. One evening, after another lonely service with only a handful of people in attendance, Michael sat in his modest office, pondering his next move. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Isaac, one of his former disciples. Isaac had stayed by Michael's side even after everything had fallen apart. "Prophet, we need to think bigger," Isaac said, his voice tinged with urgency. "The old ways won't work anymore. You've seen how the world is changing. People are on their phones more than ever. The internet, it's where the masses are." Michael sat up straight. "Social media?" Isaac nodded. "Yes, social media. You've built an empire before and can do it again. But this time, you need to be smarter. You need to use the tools of this age." Michael hesitated. He knew that his past was a liability. His name was synonymous with scandal. His very presence online would stir up controversy. But Isaac was right about one thing. People's attention was now firmly planted in the digital world. Social media had become the new church, a place for worship, a place for community, a place for influence. Michael had spent his life manipulating the physical world, but this was an entirely new frontier. Reluctantly, he agreed. The next day, Michael created accounts on Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter. He also launched a YouTube channel, but it was TikTok that intrigued him the most. The short-form video platform was addictive, fast-paced, and filled with millions of users seeking entertainment, inspiration, and a sense of connection. Michael had always been a showman, and TikTok's format would allow him to captivate an audience in ways no traditional church service ever could. It wasn't long before the prophet's presence online began to grow. Initially, he was met with resistance, mockery, criticism, and harsh words from those who remembered his past. But Michael had learned to weather storms. He knew how to weave a narrative that would win over even the most skeptical hearts. He began posting videos daily. Sometimes he went live preaching the word of hope and resilience. Other times, he simply spoke about hope, faith, and perseverance. His words were sweet, sugar-coated with promises of miracles and blessings. He would close his eyes, look up to the heavens, and speak with such conviction that the viewer couldn't help but feel moved. But what most didn't know was that his every word, every gesture, was carefully crafted to evoke an emotional response. Michael knew exactly what people wanted to hear. He knew how to exploit their deepest fears and desires. Then he started doing something even more devious. He held live healing sessions. At first, he would call people on his live stream, asking them to share their prayer requests. He'd listen attentively, nodding as though he were receiving divine revelation. He would pray for them, and within minutes, their lives were transformed. It was a performance, an act, but it worked. People began to believe. They sent in their prayer requests, their money, and their faith. They gave everything they had to have a chance to receive the blessings he promised. Michael also created special healing nights. On these nights, he would heal anyone who called in, offering them a chance to be rid of illness, financial hardship, or relationship struggles. His followers flooded his inbox, eager for the miracle they believed was just a phone call away. It didn't take long before people started sending him money. They sent him gifts, donations, and offerings, all in the hopes of receiving a miracle. Michael, always the opportunist, made sure to emphasize that the more they gave, the more time he would spend in prayer for them. He played on their insecurities, on their fears, on their deepest needs. The more they gave, the more blessings they would receive. It was a perfect cycle of deception, one that he had perfected over the years. Soon, Michael was no longer just a man with a church. He was a brand, a digital sensation. His followers numbered in the hundreds of thousands, and then millions. He had become the influencer, the prophet who transcended the physical world. His every post, his every live session was an event. People tuned in from all over the world. The offerings poured in. People followed him not just for spiritual guidance, but for a taste of the success he promised them. The time came, and Michael was ready to find someone ready to be with him, through thick and thin. Many ladies online were mouth-watering after hearing the prophet needed a wife. Michael had promised his online followers that he would have one of the online admirers as his wife. Prophet Michael needed someone who understood the digital space and things to do with social media and online content. His plan was to have a wife who would manage his socials and have future plans for his online brand. Michael requested all ladies interested to send him secret messages to his inbox. His followers flooded his inbox, eager to be the one chosen by Prophet Michael. Later, Michael invited them one by one, vetting them personally at his home for 3 months. At last, among many contestants, Michael met Aliyah. She was a TikTok celebrity, a rising star who built her following with her vibrant personality and catchy videos. Michael saw her potential. She had the reach, the audience, and the digital savvy that would take his online empire to the next level. He needed her by his side, someone who could help him manage his growing influence. At first, Aaliyah was skeptical. She had heard the rumors about Michael's past. She knew the stories of his scandal and excommunication. But Michael was persuasive. He promised her fame, wealth, and a future that no one could imagine. He charmed her with his charisma, his vision, and his understanding of the digital world. Soon, Aaliyah was swept up in his promise of a brighter tomorrow. They began collaborating, creating content together, and Michael's following skyrocketed. Malia wasn't the only one who fell under Michael's spell. Soon, Aaliyah and Michael were married in a small private wedding at an undisclosed venue. As Michael's empire grew, so did his influence over his followers. He bought vast land far from the city and began constructing a new megachurch, a physical space to complement his digital one. The church was a monument to his success, a place where people could gather, worship, and, most importantly, donate. Pastor Michael had several buses in place to carry people from the city and nearby towns to his megachurch every Sunday. Michael had learned the art of the cult of personality. He knew that it wasn't enough just to preach. He needed to create an entire ecosystem, a world in which people would willingly hand over their money, their faith, and their devotion. Michael had also started a real estate company, actively buying and selling properties. It was easy for him, as he had many physical and online followers who became his customers. People trusted Prophet Michael with their money and investments, as Michael was a good, caring businessman who wanted to uplift his followers. His real estate investment company grew quickly, becoming $1 million company within a few years. But not everyone was fooled. Isaac, his old disciple, had started to notice the familiar signs of manipulation. The money flowing in from his followers, the promises of healing, the prophetic messages. All of it felt very familiar. Isaac began to question Michael's intentions once more. It wasn't long before he started investigating Michael's new operations, diving deep into his digital empire. What he uncovered would shake Michael's world to its core. Isaac found that the so-called healing sessions were nothing more than staged performances. He discovered that the testimonies of miraculous transformations were scripted, and the people involved in the sessions were paid actors. But what disturbed Isaac the most was the real estate deals. People trusted Michael with their money, believing they were investing in a better future. But it turned out that Michael was using the funds to line his own pockets, buying land, purchasing luxury cars, and living a life of excess, while his followers continued to scrape by. Isaac couldn't stay silent any longer. He reached out to a group of former followers who had also been disillusioned by Michael's actions. Together, they began to gather evidence, preparing to expose the prophet once and for all. The storm was coming, but Michael, ever the schemer, was prepared. He had already anticipated this backlash. He had built a network of loyal followers who would stand by him no matter what. And when the accusations began to surface, he was ready with a counter-narrative, one that painted him as the victim, the misunderstood prophet who was being attacked by jealous ex-disciples. The battle for Michael's empire was about to erupt. A digital war would be waged between those who believed in the prophet and those who sought to tear him down. In the end, only one question remained. Could Michael's empire withstand the storm, or would his past finally catch up with him?